The hamstring stretch used in physical therapy has only 4 directions, while in AIS method, you can stretch the hamstring in 7 ways and directions. How to loosen your joint stiffness effectively fast using AIS stretching method. Are you familiar with the famous WD-40 spray? Nope, we are not going to use WD-40 spray to loosen your joint stiffness. I wish it was that simple. That would be cool and convenient. Perhaps it can be useful to our body in the future, especially if our body is made of moving metal parts. Anyway, WD-40 spray is a rust dissolver. If a metal nut and bolt is rusty and stuck, a spray of WD-40 will loosen up the nut and bolt, and it can also help clean and peels away the accumulating rust. So how can we correlate the action of WD-40 to our joint stiffness? When a nut and bolt or any metal joints that's supposed to move is stuck and surrounded by thick rusty brown stuff, what will be your first step to restore its actual mechanical movement? Well, it is as simple as scraping off the rust around the moving parts. But of course, this is not the way we loosen up your own tight joint. Your joint is stuck and tight and has the same mechanical reason like the nut and bolt analogy. Your joint that is stuck has accumulated substance that prevent your joint to move at its full range of motion. Adhesions is a term that represents the substance that is responsible to make your soft tissue and joint to stick each other and adhere to each other, preventing it to move. Functionally, our joint should be moving smoothly. It's gliding, sliding, and rolling. Once your joint is underused, a negative adaptation takes place to limit your joint motion. Remember, if you don't use it, you lose it. A phrase that you will hear from me over and over again until your nose bleeds. Until your nose bleeds. Since most of you hear me but does not listen, how do you keep the health of your joints? If you have a previous injury or previous soft tissue breakdown, what is actually left behind beside adhesions are scar tissues. Adhesion or scar tissues represent the rust around the stuck nut and bolt analogy. If you don't fix it, it will get worse. It's a negative snowball effect. It can spread and affect the hardest structure in the joint, like the bone itself. You can lose its function, and instead, bone can abnormally fuse together as one instead of a moving two parts. Pretty worst nightmare. In a rusty nut and bolt, it can lead to corrosion of the metal part, destroying its shape and ability to do its job to move smoothly. Ignoring this process is calamitous to your joint function that can affect other parts of your body, producing a domino effect, meaning it complicates further and affect other joints in your body. That can lead to surgery where you need to go under the knife, and doctors will need to scrape off excess accumulation of adhesion just to try bringing back the normal joint function. But you don't want to go that far. And I don't think you want this to happen to you, don't you? So how can we prevent this to happen and keep our joint as healthy as we can? The most conservative and practical way is to stretch using AIS method. If the first step to remove the rust from a nut and bolt is to manually scrape it off or break it down, with your joint, the mechanism of action is to manually and repeatedly break down the adhesion or scar tissue through detailed and accurate joint movement. Oh, By the way, if the WD-40 spray helps to lubricate by penetrating the rusty moving articulation of the rusty and bolt, hydrating yourself has the same physiological effect if you plan to stretch and free up your joint. It also helps remove those excess byproducts out from your system. So make sure that you are drinking enough water. A healthy, smooth moving joint is definitely a hydrated one. And water is your ticket and vehicle to move nutrients to your joints as well. Interestingly, WD in WD-40 spray means water displacement. It shows how water or fluids can create movement by nourishing stuck and tight areas in the joint. So make sure you are not dehydrated before you plan to get regular stretching and improving your joint movement. So now we come to the part on how exactly are you going to conservatively free up your joint. When you are removing accumulated rust from a metal, is it just one stroke or one motion? Of course not. You do it as many as you can to cover all the areas needs to be cleaned and breaks the rust. And that is what AIS principle does. AIS is inherently a repetitive approach and multi-directional stretch method in application. By research and studies, this is the most accepted basic mechanism of action, which makes it very effective. Applied AIS is a sub-maximal workout-like repetition type of stretch with gentle and gradual progression of stretch, intensity, or force. The repetitions serve as a gentle way to breaking down adhesion between muscle and fascial tissue, so it's not only on the joints. Same positive mechanical effect for long-time scar tissue caused by previous injuries. AIS covers more areas surrounding the joint than any other stretching. The stretch is only held for 2 seconds, giving the opportunity to apply more gradual stress to the stuck joint, restoring its optimal motion. Simultaneously, AIS repetition enhances joint nutrient circulation, restoring the efficiency of synovial fluid diffusion from a healthy joint motion. Synovial fluid would be like the WD-40 spray. Synovial fluid acts as a lubricant and nourishes your joint end. This is the shiny end of a bone like the fried chicken leg joint that you had for dinner. You call this part cartilage. Hydration and nutrients diffusion is crucial to keep this smooth joint in motion. Without functional repetition, it is less likely to absorb its necessary fluid to enter and diffuse in your specific joint. The repetition in AIS can go as high as 10 repetitions. You can also add several sets of 10 reps depending on how much more you need to free up your joint motion. How can we compare this to other bodywork? Massage can also break down adhesion and scar tissue, but only on the surface level. Common massage does not really have any joint movement at all, focusing on the soft tissue like muscle and fascia. If it is a thigh massage with stretch, repetition is done only in a very low repetition, usually 1 to 2 reps. In addition, if you want to free up a moving joint, the closer the force you are applying, the better it can get rid of the rust. In short, a specific and a direct contact to the adhesion that accumulated around the moving joint, the more successful you can free up a stuck and tight joint. Again, AIS approach your body by specifically working only on one joint at a time with repetition. That is why the method is called isolated stretching. The hamstring stretch used in physical therapy has only 4 directions, while in AIS method of Aaron Mattis, you can stretch the hamstring in 7 ways and directions. In comparison, thigh stretch is a multi-joint stretching and does not emphasize isolation or segmental approach, meaning between the non-moving part and moving end, there is several more joints that is moving. The same with soft stretching techniques like yoga and other passive stretching. This will definitely works if you have no specific joint to release with the stretch, and if all segment of your body is already contributing its role to be part of the whole length that you are stretching. In short, your flexibility is excellent. How static stretch works on joints. Assuming you use a static stretch to loosen up the motion of a specific joint. Let us say increasing your shoulder joint flexion using a static stretch approach. You hold it for 15 to 30 seconds. Remember, you want to break down adhesions and scar tissue. Can you visualize how I will apply long duration stretch to a rusty and stuck nut and bolt analogy? I will give you another example. This is one pretty simple, logical. Have you ever opened a jar lid that had been standing for a long time on your kitchen shelves? Do you just put pressure around the lid and hold for 15 to 30 seconds, hoping it will just give up and open? Or do you prefer to get a spreading blunt knife, stick it to the edge of the lid, and break that adhesion surrounding the lid and loosen it up to open? Is it very familiar and a crystal clear concept? A rusty nut and bolt or a jar with a stuck lid. Obviously, before they get in that state of getting stuck, they haven't been moved for a certain period of time. Therefore, constant movement or repeatedly unscrewing the nut and bolt or repeatedly opening the lid of a jar will prevent it from getting stuck. Make sense? So if you have to choose a method to resolve a stiff joint, you have to pick the one that is consistent with how your joint naturally moves. So the first rule is safety first. Motion should be specific to what and how the joint is made to move. Since you can break a glass jar if you forcefully turn the lid in a wrong direction or in an opposite direction. Second, the more repetition in one session or one application, the better. Breaking away those sticky substance and adhesion by gradually stressing the moving joint needs constant repetition. Third, the technique should be performed at cross proximity to the targeted joint. For serious and clinical case, joint mobilization or joint mob is done by trained physical therapists. This manual therapy technique really gets their hands closer to the joint that they want to, but this is already far from our health and fitness objective. If you want to go deep and include your joint to loosen up your whole body for healthy reason, active, isolated stretch is far the closest to your specific goal. Of course, without the consistency of using this type of tool or the AIS technique, you are not going anywhere, and it is impossible to achieve the result you want. Hope this is clear enough that AIS also can bring you back to full action faster than any other Bodyworks out there. So if you value your time like me when it comes to health and recovery, I'd rather pick a method which actually makes sense and with scientific basis on it. Thank you for listening. This is Jace Lee. I am an active, isolated stretch practitioner.